books.
Welcome to, and I've determined it, Carl, episode 53.
Wow. Hey, Sean, how are you?
I'm great.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, unlocking great books.
Yeah.
We're back.
We're back. And on camera as well as audio.
Oh, this is amazing, isn't it?
It
does make me think about what,
it's witchcraft.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, so what are we doing today?
Right, so today, Resilience Project. Now, this is quite a big book.
So Hugh van Cuylenburg.
Hugh van Cuylenburg, massive book in Australia particularly. I looked up sales numbers, about 250,000
Wow.
sales,
Okay,
so it's not an insignificant book.
Subtitle?
Finding happiness through gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. And we'll dive into why that's the strap line and how important that is and the lines through the book. But 2019 book, and we should just dive into...
Well, before we do, in this episode, what we'll cover is why those three things are so important: gratitude, empathy, mindfulness.
Yes.
We'll take a detour into Seligman. We'll talk about some of the strong psychology behind it, but we'll raise some important questions about, does the Resilience Project actually work?
And also, where does a book like this fit in this area, this complex area? So,
and how do you make a book about something that's really a movement, right? Like what comes first, the book or the movement? So
that's interesting, isn't it?
So shall we dive into it?
Let's go.
All right.
Books. I need my books.
Right, let's dive into the Resilience Project, and we'll start with Hugh van Cuylenburg.
Yeah, so what do you know about Hugh?
Well, I mean, Hugh's background is in education, isn't it? So we're talking about Hugh after the book.
That's right.
So his life is very different
to
what it
now.
was when he wrote the book. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting in itself, isn't it? Because he basically has written his book based on his personal experience. I mean, as we'll talk about, the book's about his story, but it's also about his teaching experience.
Yeah, that's right.
So teacher, become wellbeing advocate, became...
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, wellbeing. Yeah, that's probably a good way to describe it.
So
and media, he does a lot of media now. I was just mentioning his podcast and things like that now. So, yeah.
So what's the subtitle of the book?
Well, the subtitle is Finding Happiness.
It kind of gives it away, right?
Through gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. And so, I mean, gratitude, empathy, mindfulness, we'll talk about that a lot because that's the principle of the book. GEM is the acronym that he used. Always good to have a 3-letter acronym.
Yeah. So, look, we talked about this offline, right? It's a funny book because the book's about the project, and the project's much bigger than the book.
Yes, exactly.
Now it's it does training in schools, it does training for corporates.
In the sports teams.
It's sports teams.
Yes.
AFL and cricket up the yazoo.
And
then the NRL and
everything.
that.
Yeah.
And it has resources.
Yes.
It's obviously got staff. So it's a big thing now, and it's in schools.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, some people listening to this might know that the Resilience Project's in schools in New Zealand.
Yes,
and has been for the last 2 years.
Yeah, so the strange story of how I bumped into this book was we went to our local town hall, Christchurch Town Hall, one night.
Yeah.
Bumped into a couple of friends. And you know how they've got 2 big auditoriums? We were there for one event. They were there for another.
It was kind of...
It was Hugh speaking.
Wow.
And and they said, he's this guy. I was like, who's this guy? So I didn't really honestly know about him until probably last year when this happened.
Right.
And I was like, I wonder what this is about. But when you look over across the ditch into Australia, you see how big,
huge
this project is. And then, of course, so this was a 2019 book.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So it's a wee while ago, isn't it?
But it's blown up so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, that of course, in the book he talks about in the early days he was struggling, thought this was never going to go for grants. There's all of that. But now it's... I literally think it is in the curriculum in schools throughout Australia.
Yeah, so in a lot of places. So
let's go back, right. So he tells a story, starts telling the story about the mental ill health of his sister.
Yes.
Right. And not being able to help.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of is it's a existential moment for him and his family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he reflects on that, and he's teaching in India, right? And you want to tell the India story?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's hard to talk about the Indian story without it feeling a little bit like they call it volunteerism.
Yes.
The whole go to a country like India, volunteer as a teacher, and I guess it was the epiphany of how happy children were there versus the children he was teaching back in Australia, and kind of going, hang on, these guys
Yeah. We have so much.
Way less than
Yeah.
what we've got. So what's going on here?
Yeah.
Which is, I think a lot of people have that experience, don't they, when they go to, you go to a third world country or somewhere where, people don't have it as good, and you're like, well, maybe I should probably not stress about my next new phone or my new clothes or whatever when everyone else is struggling.
Yeah.
So I guess that was an epiphany moment for him.
Yeah.
There is a central charter.
Yes.
No, I can't remember the kid's name now.
Sanson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And there's a nice line that he uses all the way through this. This. And then he comes, so that was a touching moment for you, wasn't it? So, and he was like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
What am I going to do with this? How do I share this kind of thinking?
And then the bit we like, right? He goes back and does a master's about youth and adolescent child mental health.
Yes.
So, he builds together his GEM theory, right?
Yeah.
Which obviously gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. We'll come back and talk about that. The story is engaging story. It's an easy book to read.
Yes.
It does feel a bit twee.
Yeah.
And look, and if you're listening to this podcast and you've done any work around mental well-being, there's not a whole lot in this book for
Probably
you.
not a lot at all. And
but that doesn't mean it's a bad book, right? If you're starting out on this journey.
Yeah, well, this is the tension I felt.
Yeah.
So, I guess, and also my experience of hearing about him, he's a big thing, he's on stage, all that kind of stuff. And then you kind of go to the book going, okay, this guy's a big thing.
Yeah.
And then you go to the book
But flip that around, right? So,
yes.
So, you've spent a lot of time thinking about well-being and spiritual journey. You've been on it for years. But imagine, what does that say about the world we live in, where these very simple ideas about gratitude
are very powerful. Yes, right. Exactly.
And they change people's lives. You think about some of the stories about the AFL players and the NRL players, that basically say, I'm not going to stop journaling, I'm not going to stop doing this, it's changed my life. And you think, and I think, really? Isn't that obvious?
Yeah. And this is maybe the tension that runs through the book. So I did, I guess I had the question I wrote down here. Are books that make things accessible important? And I think there's an obvious answer of yes.
They might not be for the listeners of this podcast.
Or depending on what your experiences are, but for some people, absolutely.
I think the point he'd make is we don't do a very good job of teaching kids this in the West. We all came to it much later.
Yeah, that's true.
Imagine if your kids, imagine if they were teaching this in primary school. Maybe they are. They certainly taught my girls some version of mindfulness. But let's just back up. There's some stuff in the book. I enjoyed reading the book. It was an easy read.
Yeah.
Page 72, he says, we have so much available in Australia, so sub in any Western economy. We have so much available in Australia, but we miss what we have because we're too focused on what we don't have.
Yeah,
interesting. Good, which is why he pushes gratitude.
Yeah.
Rather than think about what you want all the time, and we'll come back and talk about that. Think about what you do have. That's cool.
There's a nice concept. Yeah.
And then he says,
a good call out too.
Page 142. I love this. More and more of us have been using social media to try to fulfill our basic psychological needs, the need to feel loved, to feel like we belong, and to feel validated.
And I guess we've broached those topics as well, haven't we? The role of social media. So there's part of me that goes, I think this is an important book.
Yeah.
And it may be geographically important.
Right.
Because this has landed, it feels like 2019 Australia, this book is like the perfect kind of right now moment, so. You
mean at the intersection of kind of what social media is doing to mental health?
But also as a country, for Australia to hear that, and culturally Australia's always been this bastion of masculinity and all that kind of stuff, so that we've got that narrative that's sitting there where this book lands into the right time, if that makes sense.
No,
so
I
feel like,
and he does, and I love how he starts dealing with NRL players.
That's it. These are great.
The biggest people he's ever met in his life. These big hulking men who run.
But that's a cultural thing again, isn't it? So those players are lauded in Australia
and yet they're just as vulnerable, and they need that stuff as much as anybody else.
So someone's called it out in a book.
So for me, right, I kept swapping between the book and the project. And that's the problem, right? The book doesn't make any sense without the project.
Yes.
And I'm not sure the project needs the book.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So and then the other kind of, I guess, source of tension is this a memoir and a story or a self-help book? Yeah. And it kind of
tries to be a bit between both. Yeah, there is another book he's written since then.
Yeah, and I've listened to that too, called Let Go.
I don't know that at all.
That was a post-COVID book.
Right.
Where it's talking about his experiences where, because of the Resilience Project, when COVID hit and the challenges that people were experiencing during COVID, and because Hugh was a bit of a media personality, everyone was coming to him. Okay. Saying, Hugh, what do we do about this? Hugh. Yes. Carl's just flashing a very famous mug. And then he was like, hang on a second, I'm not all together here as well. And so that covers the topics of shame, expectation, social media. Oh, wow. So that goes into a slightly different realm.
So we should back up and say, so the acronym GEM sits throughout the book. It's in the subtitle. He's talking about gratitude, empathy, mindfulness, right? That's his thing. Yep. Gratitude, what 3 things went well for you today? I really like that rather than what 3 things are you grateful for? Because he does make the point, if you ask people what they're grateful for, they often say the same things day after day.
Yeah, well, it's the
family,
big stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas if you say, tell me about today.
Yeah, what happened that reflects that? Or, absolutely. Yeah.
And then empathy, I love this.
So do you journal? Here's a question. Do you journal?
I started journaling again, literally, after I read this book. Because on the back of the book, there is a gratitude journal page, and I photocopied it. I can send you some.
Yeah.
But you do it anyway.
Oh, I do it anyway,
right? Yeah. But I do it, but I don't do it around gratitude, right? Thinking... so many things go right on every day. Yeah, actually stopping.
Well, that's what we do. We write 3 things 3 good things that happened today.
I'll talk about the mindfulness in a minute because we've done that. Yeah, we've learned to do that anyway. But that whole moment of, hey, isn't this amazing? Look at this. So, okay, gratitude. What went well for you? Empathy. Think about someone you know who's going through a tough time. Think about what you'd say to them. Write it down, right? Yeah. And let them know you're thinking of them. Yeah, I love that. And then mindfulness, right? Yeah, and. So there are 2 things that I like, and I don't know if this is in his show that we'll talk about in a minute, or the podcast, or the book, but he says that when you try to meditate, it's easy to get frustrated about your mind wandering. Yeah. But the practice is actually bringing your mind back.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that is a very core part of meditation. Great. Yeah.
So rather than, I'm not in the moment, I'm always always out of the moment. That's the point, right? Yeah, coming back to the moment is the point.
And it's the idea of a rep. Isn't it? Right. You've just done a rep.
Yes.
You've just now
I've never thought about thought about meditation as reps. Yeah. What's your 1 rep max?
Reps and sets. Yeah, that's right. It's always reps and sets.
So mindfulness, right? Go for a walk. Notice some stuff. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you feel? And that's very Zen practice, being in the moment. But I love that, right? Yeah. Like you think about
important concept.
Today, the sun's on my back. You know,
the good coffee. Good coffee. Yeah.
When I walked this morning with the dogs, the sound of the magpies in the trees.
Oh, were they ready to swoop?
I just love that noise.
No, it is nice, isn't it? The bird song. Yeah.
So, that's all good stuff. And then part of me as a sociologist, thinks, people don't know that?
That's a shame. That is the sad bit.
Yeah, whose spiritual life doesn't have even those basics in it, right?
Is it? Yeah. It's a really good point. It is. That's the very reflective moment, isn't it? That's a very poignant kind of moment. But it's
so right.
So we got to tool people up, don't we? Well, somehow, and I think that's where, you use the word entry kind of guide, raise awareness. Yeah, but then when you start walking the line of expertise, you're kind of reaching around under this book, going, okay, that's maybe not what he intended.
Well,
but
we'll come back.
But it's easy.
We'll come back to that because clearly that's the obviously the question that we both grappled with is, well, does this work? And we'll come back to that in a minute. So at one level, there is some really good psychology under here.
Yes.
So there's a phenomenon in psychology called an arrival fallacy, which is you think you'll be fulfilled or happy when you arrive somewhere. That somewhere might be when you finish your PhD. It might be when you have a bigger house. It might be when you lose 15 pounds. It's always when you arrive somewhere, of course. And what we both know, and what everybody who thinks about this knows, is it's the struggle, not the victory, right?
Yes, that's right.
Right, it's having the thing to aim at. But arrival fallacy, he's kind of talking about arrival fallacy. Everybody thinks that the next thing they buy, and of course, this is how marketing and capitalism works, right? The next car, the next house.
It sells you the big thing, but the reality is it's
so
not
that's obvious, right? Arrival fallacy. And the other one is that a comparison is the thief of joy, right? And we know psychologically we always compare ourselves
and that's
upwards.
what social media is hyped.
But it's always an upward comparison. We always compare ourselves to people that have more. And so what gratitude does is it goes, they've got more, but my God, you've got a lot. You should be thankful for. So all of that, focus on what you have, not what you don't have.
Yeah, all important stuff.
Yeah, all important stuff.
No doubt.
And being in the present moment. And what I really like is, as we have a number of times, he really hammers social connection and the importance of social connection. So all of that stuff sounds great. He's a huge Martin Seligman fan. We covered Seligman in the first series.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
I like all of that.
Yeah.
But then the question gets begged. Does it work?
Does it work? And what are we trying to achieve here? And I think this is that line of, like when a book is a memoir and a self-help book, it's trying to do two things at once. When it's raise awareness, but kind of, I feel like the foundations that the books, while it talks about the right stuff, if you poke this with an academic stick, and I'm not saying that
we're going to in a sec,
then you're kind of like, what's there? You know, like where did that come from? Because you didn't just come up with the concepts of,
So, right, before we get to does it work, our generous question is it harmless? Like the flip around, like if you get people to be gratitude, to be empathetic,
well, this is the thing. This is the point.
One of the points he makes, and I don't know where he got the statistic from, and I'm sure it can't be true, but he thinks that by 2030, depression will be the leading cause of death in Australia and across the OECD or something like that. Right. So he's really going after depression.
Yeah.
If you've got clinical depression, these things aren't going to help.
No.
Now, interestingly, this is where we get to play the geeky game. There is an evaluation of the resilience project in schools done by the University of Melbourne. I just happen to have it here.
Yes.
Right? And of course, the evaluation says it works fine. The evaluation's not very good.
Yeah.
Like the evaluation.
Yeah, and actually, I sent you a link last night because I was like, it's very hard to... when you start looking at that through critical eyes, you've got that whole... I mean, we were alluding to this in our previous episode about, calling bullshit. Calling bullshit.
What's the sample
Where's
size?
the counterfactual?
Who took part, right?
Yes. And the people who took part are the people who are taking part in the Resilience Project.
Yeah. But it's the point you're raising at the beginning, right? The only way you could really evaluate this in a way that be compelling is to have a very clear success statement at the beginning. What's going to happen to these kids after they've been through the Resilience Project? What will be different for them? And that difference might be in 5 years or 10 years, right?
See,
so hold on. Will we see it in a reduction in the incidence of depression or suicide ideation or what? Like, what is success? Tell us.
That's exactly right.
And then we can see if it works.
Yeah. And you've heard me talk about this before with mental health. Mental health is such a complex issue. Yes. It's got layers and layers and layers of complexity. And there's a lot of stuff that raises awareness.
Yes.
And there's a lot of stuff that dips into the surface. So we talk about, we've got all the meditation apps and all this kind of stuff. But the language that often gets used around mental health is we dip into the top and then we talk about suicide.
Yes.
Clinical, depression. Yeah. We're talking about very, very...
So we're talking about mental illness rather than mental health. Sue Bagshaw made the same point to me, here. Yeah. We talk about mental health. We never really do anything about mental health because you got to get... That's a primary health problem, right?
And there's complexities in all of that. So we quite often get into this, I do this little thing, and then we talk about the really big stuff, but there's all the stuff in between, and there's the complexity that comes from this. So
But again, a proper impact model would have what are the outcomes, what are the outputs, what are the outcomes,
absolutely,
how do we move to, how do we sum to an impact?
Like great example when you talk about mental health in schools. Why haven't we got mental health programs in schools? But also, who's at the front end of delivering that project?
Right,
it's teachers.
Yes.
So once again, we're just like teachers magically, and teachers are not staring
Well,
at...
don't forget here, so again, as you all know, this podcast comes from Otatahi in Christchurch. After the earthquakes, we had social workers in school. It was funded as part of the recovery from the earthquake. It's been killed off, I think, mostly now. But that was also a great way to start those conversations.
Yeah. So there's I guess my point is the expertise factor here, and also the audience. So if you're taking, I mean, we know there's big issues in sport from a cultural perspective.
Right.
So you could walk into a professional sports team, especially some of those sports like AFL and things like that, where, you know, like the contact sports, the physical sports, most of the people, you know, in that room have come work their way into that. They, you know, like it's not walking into polo you know, you're not going into top end.
You've earned it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking to 20-somethings, young men who are handed eye-watering amounts of money and told that they're really important. Yeah. Like, so you're talking about there's a chamber for...
How does that not...
There's a chamber for dropping something very simple
but two things in there, right? Like, first of all, how does that not mess with their heads?
Oh, no, totally.
And secondly, they're probably experiencing the arrival fallacy too. As soon as I make first grade for Carlton...
Yeah, well, it's been my dream to play in the AFL forever.
And now I am, and that's great. You play in the AFL. Yeah. How good is this, right? You get to play cricket. We have to talk about, is it Beefy? And
yes.
He's my favourite character. But I do want to...
But I guess my point is the context is more complex. Like if you're putting a teacher in front of a class with 15 countries, lots of different cultures, diversity, and you're telling someone how to meditate, you know, like what do our friends who have grown up in Eastern countries go, well, hang on, hey, what do you, and then talking about struggle, and you know, like they've been through struggle. Yeah. So
I get it.
Yeah.
And look, and to give Cuylenburg some credit. So there's that show on. Is it on Prime? Amazon Prime.
Yes.
So there's a 1 hour special that you might as well watch rather than.
This is my line.
No, sorry, I'll come back to that. But he does say in that special, right? He's very clear about his lane. So when people come to him that have some significant mental health issues,
totally.
He's like, I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah, no, good.
You need to go and see a psychologist, right?
Good.
You know, we are raising awareness about some everyday things that we should all be swimming in anyway, and for all sorts of reasons we're not. And
I guess the book is one man's perspective.
Yes,
from his.
Yeah, he does say it's supported by his work he did at his master's level. But look, now we are being academic.
But there's the attribution thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, tell me the line about the...
Well, I'm proposing a new category.
Okay.
Yeah, a book that should have stayed as a talk.
Right. Yeah.
I
do. Like lots of TED Talks.
Yeah. That get... Like, and we've talked about the book that should have stayed the article.
Yes.
Where you stretch it to fill the available space.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case here, but maybe that's why it keeps...
Yeah, if you'd experienced the Resilience Project, maybe you want to know the story about how did Hugh come up with it, and maybe the book's great for that reason. And if
it's a book about the Resilience Project, how it came to be, great.
Yeah.
But it also is the self-help.
You're right.
It's his memoir to some extent as well. So,
a better edited book might have done. Because it's weird that it has an appendix with stuff in it, like the journal, right? Like, give it a try. I like that. A book that should have stayed a talk.
Yeah, but then you've got the content creation of the book and the folding out and the folding out. Yeah. When, you see initiatives sometimes it's orientated around one guy, you know, like, hey, you can't be everything to everyone all the time. So if Hugh doesn't turn up at your school, are you disappointed?
But think about it. But let's go back to the talk piece. So most people can talk between 130 and 150 words a minute. If the talk's 60 minutes, that's 9,000 words.
Yeah.
It's not a book.
No.
It's not even a very good article.
Yeah, that's right.
So to make that talk, which is great, into a book, you have to fill it with lots of stuff that's not necessarily pertinent to your argument. Yeah.
So maybe that's I don't know. I'm playing a little bit.
So let's think about the good bits, right?
Yeah.
the book was sufficiently interesting to make us go and have a look at the Resilience Project and raise questions about, does it actually work, right? And that drove us down into a rabbit hole about, is the evaluation of its impact any good, right? It made us go and have a look at his talk, so it's driven us, it's motivated us to ask expansive questions about the Resilience Project. Yeah. That's a good outcome, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. But also the accessibility. So I asked that slightly rhetorical question, are books that make things accessible important? And I would say yes, and I'd say it's one of those books.
Yeah.
But if you came here looking for more, you may be disappointed.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe where people get split into two camps, isn't it? So first time, never heard of this, young professional rugby league player who's trying to make sense of what the hell is going on in the maelstrom around him and why he's feeling like this.
Great place to start.
Bing. Drop that into the room. Perfect.
Okay. I like
if
that.
If you were, a refugee who's moved from another country who then picks up this book and kind of goes, So I think, So,
or
an academic kind of angle on it.
Yes, and.
Yes.
I was having a conversation with my wife the other day. I was listening to a Mel Robbins.
Mel Robbins.
Podcast.
Yeah.
And we're making the point while we're walking the dogs. She already knew all that stuff. But if you think about our physical health, we don't go, well,
why not?
I lifted some weights in March. I don't need to do it again. We know
we need reminders.
We need reminders, right? Yeah. And this book it's an easy read.
Yeah.
It's an easy listen.
Yeah.
And it's a timely reminder. Like, as I said, I started journaling my gratitude journal again.
Maybe I should do it again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
And that's maybe why, I quite enjoy his podcast, because he's like this stuff, this is baked in behind everything he's doing from podcast, but he's off exploring the different areas, and maybe that's why it's a little bit more interesting, because it's been contextualized and all those types of things.
That's all good stuff, and I don't regret reading it. Like, sometimes,
so that's good. We do regret books.
I'm not saying it's 4 hours of my life I'm not getting back.
Yes, that's exactly right. So that's a very, very big tick for this book. So I mean, solid book.
Solid. Well, no. It's more than that, isn't it? It's like the debate about ambivalence. Ambivalence is kind of in the middle, but actually ambivalence is made up of high points and low points.
Yeah.
For some people, this is a really good book.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's probably you don't need it.
Yeah.
And on average,
and it might
on average, it's solid.
Yeah.
But actually, for some people, this book might be life changing.
Yeah. And I come back to that context. Right. That cultural thing about Australia, having lived there for a long time. Yes. I am Australian as well. To have someone like Hugh stand up, say what he said, and play hey, I'm going to lead something here, stand up. That's a great. That really appeals to Australian culture as well.
And he
so
probably
that's
has,
important.
And he probably has license to say it because he was a very good sportsman as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So for him to do it, I think is very important, and that's why. That takes a lot of guts. I was thinking, imagine about that, imagine we know what it's like to kind of write something, to stand forward and do this. Yeah. And it kind of runs counterfactual to the narratives of superheroes and they don't have any chinks in their armor. Yeah. He's quite happy to stand up and talk about his vulnerabilities and things like that. So that's good. Yeah. So you cannot fault someone who does that. I don't think so.
I think that's a great summary.
Well, all right. Yeah. Okay. Didn't even try.
On to the next one.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.